All right, it's Wednesday. We're moving through the week here, building up to Pitt's game at Georgia Tech on Saturday. Big one for the Panthers. Big one for the Yellow Jackets, too. Georgia Tech has plenty to play for in this game, just like Pitt does. I don't know if I'd have to look at the scenarios. I think both of these teams, with a loss in conference play, have to be viewing this game as a must-win if they want to keep alive their hopes of making the ACC championship game and potentially the college football playoffs. So this is a huge game, and there's a lot riding on it. I think it's senior day or senior night, as it were, for Georgia Tech. It's going to be a 7 o'clock kickoff, so it's going to be prime time. It's going to be dark. It's going to, under the lights and all of those things. Lots of exciting sort of, environment to go around at that one. But when it gets down to it, it's still a game of football. It's still blocking and tackling. It's still making plays. And while we've talked a lot about big picture things, and we'll continue to talk about big picture things, I'm sure tonight on the live show we'll talk about, the kind of the big picture for Pitt and how it stacks up, and how the ACC race could pan out, and what Pitt what you're rooting for, and scoreboard watching, and all those different things. When it comes down to it, there's some big questions and big storylines heading into this game, specifically related to the game, not just related to all those things around it. So what does Pitt need to do? What do they have to do to beat Georgia Tech? What are some of the keys to the game? And what do I think are some of the main storylines and main notables to know heading into this game? We're going to talk about Mason Heinschel. We're going to talk about Kyle Lewis. We're going to talk about defending Haynes King. We're going to talk about everything. I think we're going to talk about defending Haynes King. I got a bunch of stuff. Offensive line, injury stuff, big storylines, big topics heading into Pitt, Georgia Tech. Let's break it down here on the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, I had to double check my list of topics I wanted to talk about. I couldn't remember if defending Haynes King was on that list. I mean, it's just generally a topic we're going to talk about all week anyway, but we did talk about it yesterday and some of the running quarterbacks that Pitt has faced over the last few years and how they've generally done against those guys, that they haven't really had somebody go off outside of Cade Klubnik's 50-yard touchdown run to win the game last year against Clemson. They haven't really had anybody go off, basically since Kyron Drones in 2023. He had a pretty good rushing game against Pitt. He had 73 yards on designed runs. And that's going to be one of the keys in this game. Because I was looking at some of the, opponent performances against Georgia Tech, like how other quarterbacks have done against the Yellow Jackets this year, particularly in recent games. And almost every time when there was this big performance from an opposing quarterback, Haynes King put up some ridiculous number, 400 yards of offense or 500 yards of offense or something like that. And so that's going to be a big storyline all week long. That's going to be a huge story in the game. And every time Georgia Tech snaps the ball, you're going to be wondering, can Pitt contain Haynes King? And so that's something that we're obviously going to continue to be focused on, just like we have already. But we have different topics to talk about today, and it starts with the guy who was just up there. The picture flashed just before I got a chance to point at it. It's Mason Heinschel, Pitt's freshman quarterback, now 5-1 as the starter. His worst game as a starter against Notre Dame, I don't think there's any question about that. Below 50% completion rate, 16 of 33, threw for 126 yards and 1 interception, no touchdowns. You thought that his performance against Syracuse was the low mark, but he was even worse against Notre Dame. Against Syracuse, he completed 54% for 140 and an interception. So not much better. About 6 percentage points better on the completion rate, 14 yards better, and still no touchdowns and 1 interception. And somebody on the message boards pointed this out yesterday. I think it was our good friend Smenges, who always shows up in the mailbag. The similarity in stat line. So Mason Heinschel, Eli Holstein. Heinschel this season has completed 61.8% of his passes. Holstein, 61.6. Like a 0.2 percentage point difference. Heinschel has thrown 12 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Holstein, 12 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. It's almost uncanny how close they are. Now, Heinschel has played 6 full games. Holstein only played the first 4. And so you have a little bit of a different sample size, but you also have to consider who they played against. Eli Holstein, 12 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. 8 of his 12 touchdowns came against Duquesne and Central Michigan. 2 of his 6 interceptions came in those games as well. He's thrown for 1,000 yards. Half of them came in those first 2 games. Overall, the numbers are very similar. Once you start breaking it down, though, to just how these guys have done against Power 4 competition, it's an interesting picture. Heinzel against Power 4 is pretty much all of his stats. 1,637 yards, 61.5% completion, 12 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Compared to Holstein against Power 4 competition, so Heinzel completed 61.5% against P4 teams, Holstein 63.5%, so 2 percentage points better. Holstein has 4 touchdowns and 4 picks against Power 4 competition. Heinzel 12 and 6. So a 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio for Mason Heinzel against Power 4 teams. A 1-to-1 touchdown interception ratio for Eli Holstein against Power 4 teams. When you narrow it down a little bit more, though, because some of these stats for Eli Holstein were taken into consideration the Boston College, NC State, and Notre Dame games when he was not the starting quarterback. He came in mop-up duty at the end. He's 5 of 11 for 31 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 pick in those 3 games. If we take those out, if we just look about full games against Power 4 opponents, okay, Mason Heinzel versus Eli Holstein. Heinzel's numbers all sort of stay the same, but if we want to get a comparative sample of Eli Holstein versus Mason Heinzel against Power 4 opponents, understanding that not all 6 or 8 of these teams are the same. Obviously Notre Dame is the best opponent Pitt has faced all season. Eli Holstein came in at the end in mop-up duty. He did throw a touchdown, but he came in at the end in mop-up duty in that game. But if you just look full games against Power 4 opponents, so for Heinzel, that's Boston College, Florida State, Syracuse, NC State, Stanford, Notre Dame, 6 games, excuse me. And for Holstein, that's West Virginia and Louisville. Okay, so you're comparing a 6-game sample to a 2-game sample. If we go per game, well, first of all, completion percentage. Against Power 4 teams, and he played the full game, Mason Heinzel, 61.5% completion. For Eli Holstein, in the West Virginia and Louisville games, 57.1. So 4 percentage points less. Touchdowns and interceptions. Mason Heinzel against P4 teams, 12 touchdowns, 6 picks. Eli Holstein, 3 and 3. He had 1 touchdown and 1 interception against West Virginia, 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions against Louisville. Yards per game. Mason Heinzel against Power 4 teams, 272. Eli Holstein in his 2 complete games against P4 teams, 265. So a difference of about 7 yards per game. And I think what it boils down to is, the numbers do favor Heinzel, the 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, as opposed to Holstein being, 1-to-1, touchdown to interception ratio against Power 4 teams. Yardage is roughly the same, a difference of about 7 passing yards per game. And completion percentage is roughly the same, about 4 percentage points difference. 61.5 versus 57.1. You'd still rather have the 61.5, but it's not a huge difference. And so inevitably this happens after a poor performance. And Mason Heinzel was not very good against Notre Dame. He'd be the first to tell you that. And if you were to make a strong case, he would not disagree. And so, when you have a quarterback play poorly, I think sometimes you get into a question of, well, should they make a change? Is the bloom off the rose? Is he not as good as we thought he was, or whatever it might be? And I think my take on this is, no, you don't make a change. It doesn't matter to me if the numbers are similar in Heinzel's games against Power 4 competition this year. I think, compared with Holstein, I think there's a couple key differences. One is that these are Mason Heinzel's first 6 career starts, right? Eli Holstein came into this season with 10 career starts. That's not a ton, but, his first, when he played, Duquesne to open the season, he was making his 11th career start. When Mason Heinzel started against Boston College, it was his first career start. So you have a little bit more experience, and I think with that experience and playing time, it's okay and understandable to expect a higher level of performance than what you got out of Eli Holstein in those first 4 games. I also think that Mason Heinzel has, even in his worst moments, shown more upside than Eli Holstein. I still think Eli Holstein has upside. I still think he can be a good quarterback, a good college quarterback. It may be at Pitt, it may be somewhere else, but I think he can be good. I think he's got a good arm. He can run well. He needs to do a better job of kind of, short intermediate passing, taking what the defense gives him and everything like that. I think he can be good, but I think Heinchel has shown in his 6 starts so far that he's got the higher ceiling, that he has more upside. And the fact that he's a true freshman, the fact that he's playing for the first time, even if he's got 6 starts under his belt, he's still a young, inexperienced player. And I think you see that come through. You see it come through certainly in the bad games like Syracuse and Notre Dame. But, you saw it against Stanford. You saw it against Florida State. Some of the decisions, some of the mistakes. Even NC State, he completed less than 60% of his passes. He had, not really arguably, he had the best game by a freshman quarterback in Pitt history. And still completed less than 60% of his passes. I think with, I don't actually think there's a real question of whether you change quarterbacks. I think the numbers make it seem like there might be a discussion to have, but I don't think there's a discussion to have. Unless he goes to Georgia Tech and throws multiple interceptions in the first half or in the red zone or in the end zone or something like that, maybe you consider sitting him down and letting him watch for a little bit. But I think at this point, you've committed to Mason Heinchel as your quarterback for this season and for the future. And I don't think you make a change back. And I can't really imagine that it's, I think coaches consider all things at all times, but I can't imagine it's getting a serious look. Because, yes, Heinchel was terrible against Notre Dame, but one game before that, he threw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns on the road at Stanford. 2 interceptions, but still. The game before that, he threw for 423, 3 touchdowns and no picks. So, 2 games combined, Stanford and NC State, he throws for 727 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. I'm not going to say he bought himself, has the capital to have a bad game like he had against Notre Dame, but I do think, there's been enough that you've seen out of him that you stick with him. And this has a potential to be a good matchup. Georgia Tech, not a great pass defense. They're number 11 in the ACC in passing yards allowed per game. They've allowed the 7th most passing touchdowns this season. They're also last in the conference in interceptions. They have 2 all season, Georgia Tech's defense. Incidentally, Stanford is next to last in the ACC with 3 interceptions. Heinchel threw 2 of those. But if you look at there's a few different things. One is, so I looked at Mason Heinchel against the teams in the ACC that he's faced and how he's done. So, NC State is dead last in the conference in pass defense. They've given up almost 300 yards per game. Heinchel threw for 423 on them. Stanford is 15th in the ACC. They've given up 285 passing yards per game. Heinchel threw for 304. Boston College is 13th in the conference. 273 passing yards allowed per game. Heinchel threw for 323. Syracuse is 12th. They've given up 266 passing yards per game, and Heinchel only had 140. But Florida State is number 4 in the conference, giving up less than 200 passing yards per game. Heinchel threw for 321 against them. Georgia Tech right now is number 11. So if you look at the ACC teams Pitt has faced, they are behind Florida State in terms of passing yards allowed per game, but they're better than Syracuse, Boston College, Stanford, and NC State. However, that's season-long production. In the last 4 games, Georgia Tech has gotten carved up. 3 out of the last 4 in particular. So NC State, C.J. Bailey threw for 340 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, that was a game where Haynes King had 400 passing yards and 100 rushing yards. Pretty ridiculous. But Duke's Darian Mensah threw for 373 and 2 touchdowns. No interceptions. And then Dylan Lonergan from Boston College, most recently, threw for 362 yards and 2 touchdowns with no picks. Georgia Tech is 2-1 in those 3 games. Again, that's 3 out of their last 4 games. Georgia Tech won 2 of those. They beat Boston College and Duke. They lost to NC State. But here's 3 out of the last 4 games. C.J. Bailey, Darian Mensah, and Dylan Lonergan have all gone for at least 340 yards with multiple touchdowns and no interceptions against Georgia Tech's pass defense. I don't know if any of us is in position to say whether, how Mason Heinchel compares with CJ Bailey, Dylan Lonergan, or Darian Mensah. We've seen Lonergan and Bailey in person, but we've also seen Heinchel be up and down. So it's no guarantees with any of that kind of thing. But 3 out of the last 4 games, Georgia Tech has given up some big days and big performances to opposing quarterbacks. So I think there's a reason to believe that Heinchel can go to Atlanta in front of a raucous crowd, a crowd that's going to be challenging, but there should be opportunities there for him to make plays. And I think, like, if you're fading on Mason Heinchel, if you feel like he's, not as good as he looked earlier in the season. No, on Saturday against Notre Dame, he was not as good as he looked earlier in the season. At Syracuse, he was not as good as he looked against Boston College or NC State or Stanford or Florida State. But I think, you've seen enough good plays and enough upside to continue to be excited about this guy and his potential for the future. All right, I've spent a lot more time on this than I expected. I was going to get through like 4 or 5 topics. I'll tell you one other thing, though, that's on my mind, because we'll probably talk basketball tomorrow to get ready for that UCF game for Pitt tomorrow night, particularly after they beat Bucknell on Monday night. But one other thing that I think is important that needs to get better for Pitt, and it's an individual player. And I still think this guy is really, really good. I think he is... I think he's one of the best players on the team, and that's Kyle Lewis. And I'm noticing now that they gave Kyle Lewis officially 5 tackles against Notre Dame. I thought I had seen that he only had 4. I'm going to look something up. Actually, I have the official box score here. Now, they may have changed something after the fact, but officially, after the game, they announced him as having 4 tackles. This is the official box score. Looking at Pitt's game notes online now, they're saying he had 5. If he had 4 tackles, that would be his fewest of the season. 5 ties his low for the season. He had 5 tackles against Central Michigan. And last year, he only had 2 games where he had 4 tackles. 2 games where he had less than 5 tackles. Kyle Lewis, I still think is one of the best players on this team. He's one of the best players on defense. I don't think it's as clear-cut that he is the best player on defense after 10 games. He's got 6.5 tackles for loss. 3 of them came in the opener against Duquesne. He's got 2 sacks. Those both came in the opener against Duquesne. He has made a lot of plays. Like, there's no question. He has I'm looking. He's forced a fumble. He's got 2 fumble recoveries. He has 2 interceptions. 2 interceptions, 1 against Stanford, 1 against West Virginia. He makes big plays. He's very good. But I think they need more out of Kyle Lewis. I think Kyle Lewis needs to have a huge game on Saturday. I think Rasheem Biles will have a big game on Saturday. And I think there's a handful of other guys that I'm expecting to step up and really produce against Georgia Tech. But Kyle Lewis is I think he's got to have a double-digit game, a double-digit tackle game on Saturday against Georgia Tech. Kyle Lewis needs to be all over Haynes King. He needs to, and I don't know how it'll align and whether Georgia Tech runs King to the boundary more to the field, and maybe that'll cut down on Lewis's opportunities. But I mean, with the way Rasheem Biles is playing right now, if I'm Georgia Tech, I'm not sending Haynes King out toward him. You know what I mean? But I think they need more out of Lewis. I think he's been good, but not as great as he was last year. And I think we talked about how it was possible that he could have a very good season but fall short of what he did last season. He's averaging a little less than 6 tackles per game, but actually he didn't play against NC State, and he didn't record a tackle against Syracuse. So, I mean, he has 58 tackles in the other 8 games that he's played. That's what is 8 go into 58? 7 times? A little more than 7 tackles per game. So, I mean, he's producing there. And like I say, he's got 6.5 tackles for loss, but 3 of them came in the opener. And he doesn't have a sack since the Duquesne game. Kyle Lewis needs to not just be solid, not just be smart and read the offense and get guys lined up and do all of those things. He needs to come up with some big plays. And he's got 2 interceptions. So, I mean, I can't say he's not making big plays, but I think they need a little bit more out of Kyle Lewis than what they've gotten so far. Because I think Rasheem Biles has been outstanding. I think the safeties have played well. I think the defensive line has done the best that they could. And I think the corners have been solid. I think Braylon Lovelace has been pretty good overall. I don't think he had his best game against Notre Dame either, but I think he's been pretty good overall. And I'm not like I just went through every position, and I'm not going to turn around and say, but Kyle Lewis is the weak link. Kyle Lewis is not the weak link. Kyle Lewis is not, what's missing. But I do think for this defense to take another step, they're going to need Kyle Lewis to do more than he has so far this season. And I think he's capable of it. I think he's got the ability and the athleticism and all of that. So I'm expecting him to take that step. But we'll see. I think this could be a big Kyle Lewis game on Saturday. Of course, well, going into the Notre Dame game, I think I posted on the message boards that I thought Raphael Williams was a player to watch on offense. And he could have been if he caught that pass on first drive, or the other one on third down that I think he dropped. And so I got that one wrong. But I also said Rasheem Biles was a player to watch on defense. And Biles, according to the official stat sheet, had 9 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and an interception, and a pass breakup. So Biles ended up panning out. I got that one right. We'll see if I get this one right. Kyle Lewis, a player to watch at Georgia Tech on Saturday. All right, we'll talk some hoops tomorrow. And anything else notable that we need to wrap up for the Pitt Georgia Tech game. We'll have the mailbag on Friday, of course. So make sure you post your questions on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. I'll have the thread there for you. You can post your questions in that thread. We'll answer as many as we can in the mailbag. And then don't forget tonight, the live stream, 8:30 p.m. right here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't what was I going to tell you? Oh, to subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com so you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. All right. Thanks for watching today. Hope you've had a great week so far. Enjoy your Wednesday. We'll talk to you tonight for the live stream and then tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.